Drinks, food, art, fun. This is Hops and Spirits Kentucky.
We're back after a week off. I hope everyone had a safe and happy 4th of July. We got a great episode for you this week as we continue our road trip series 2023, this time with a trip down to Myrtle Beach and talking to a guy that has some connections to Kentucky as he used to work at 1020. Now he's at Crooked Hammock and Larry Horwitz. But first, what's pouring? Some news and notes around Kentucky. Lexington Burger Week is happening now through Sunday, July 16th. Enjoy $7 burgers from participating restaurants. For more information on those restaurants and burgers, check out LexingtonBurgerWeek.com. And don't forget to download the app so you can check in as well. And Louisville Burger Week is returning Monday, July 17th through Sunday, July 23rd. It also features $7 burgers from around more than 40 restaurants, and participants can download that mobile app to compete for prizes. Goodwood Brewing is bringing a new concept to Bowling Green this fall. The GameYard Social is a family-friendly and fun spot for anyone looking for a place to gather. The bar and restaurant combo will feature a relaxed backyard setting, complete with interactive games, food and drink, TVs, live entertainment, and plenty of spaces to hang out. The experience will include a full kitchen featuring American favorites, large outdoor game area, a private rooftop dining space, and cabana-like areas available for rent. The interactive yard games for all ages will include cornhole, life-size beer pong, foot pool, and Connect 4, duck pin bowling, giant Jenga, so much more. And indoor and outdoor bars will house many TVs for guests to enjoy and serve craft beers, a variety of bourbons and spirits along with cocktails. So that's kind of a pretty cool thing. And they've also got another location, Goodwood location, opening up in Owensboro soon. And for those that enjoy hot dogs, the 3rd annual Lexington Hot Dog Eating Contest at Boonedogs will happen on Wednesday, July 19th. Contestants will compete to see how many foot-long hot dogs and buns they can eat in 10 minutes. First place will receive a gift card, trophy, and a shirt. You need to check that out. Check out Boonedogs for more information there. Chef Ouita Michel opened up Holly Hill Cooking Studio at 167 South Main Street in Versailles. The space offers opportunities for visitors to learn about Kentucky cuisine and food culture. Shop hours are 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturdays. You can visit hollyhillco.com, then click Cooking Studio to see a schedule of classes. And in a bit of sad news, Parsix Social, which opened in late February at the Fayette Mall in Lexington, has shut down. The bar and restaurant was in the former Bar Louie location opposite the Cheesecake Factory, so if you're hoping to go there, you might have missed your opportunity. But up next, we continue our road trip series with a trip to Myrtle Beach as we talk with Crooked Hammock Brewing brewmaster Larry Horwitz. Enjoy.
Remember to check out Hops and Spirits on social media at Hops Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find Hops and Spirits on YouTube and at hopspirits.com.
Joining us here for our Q&A this week, it's part of our Road Trip Series 2023 because we're heading down to Myrtle Beach, and we're talking with Crooked Hammock, and we're welcoming their head of brewing operations, Larry Horwitz. Larry, welcome in.
Hey, Jonathan, how are you?
I'm good, and did I say your last name correct? Because I feel like I could easily screw that one up.
You nailed it. Good work.
I try really hard. And you might be going, well, that's a long road trip. True, but Larry does have some connections back to Kentucky as well, so it all will make sense when we're done talking. But I always like to start this off with, or actually it might make sense here in this next little bit, because I call this part the Cliff Notes. Tell us a little bit about yourself, but not too much, because I've got lots of questions to ask.
Sure. So I'm a 30-year veteran of the craft brewing industry. I actually did not get my start in craft beer. I work for a major international brewery who has a production facility in Columbus, Ohio, whose name we won't mention. But I learned a lot there and really got my foot in the door of beer culture and quality beer and caring about beer. And then I spent a bunch of time working at craft breweries all across the country, famously in Columbus, Ohio, at the now defunct Hoster Brewing Company, which is actually not defunct anymore. It's been reopened under new leadership by a guy named Danny Meyer. But unusually at the time, that was a lager brewing craft brewery, and we'll talk more about that later. Then after opening a series of brewery restaurants and brew pubs and tap rooms across the United States, I landed on the East Coast for about 15 years with a restaurant group called Iron Hill Brewery, where we just started racking up national and international awards and making world-class beer. At that time, 13 breweries in 4 states. Now there are, I think, 22 or 23 breweries in 12 or 13 states. Left there after a really long and fun run to open my own brewery with a partner in Columbus, Ohio. Unfortunately, the market and the pandemic decided that wasn't to be. So that brand has been shuttered, and may she rest in peace. But then went to work for a really awesome group there in Louisville, Kentucky called 1020 Craft Brewery. I was the founding brewmaster and the head of brewing operations for that group. I've since moved on, but they're doing really awesome stuff in Louisville, and I have a feeling, not having talked to them in a couple of weeks, that they're headed towards Lexington. So you may see a 1020 tap room in your region in the not too distant future. I left there on the way to the beach, so I had the opportunity to go to work for Crooked Hammock Brands, a subsidiary of Ouita Hospitality. So we have a few different restaurant brands in addition to the Crooked Hammock brew pubs. And I've got an awesome team of guys here. We're basically making beer at the beach for people who come to the beach for about a third of the year, where we do 2/3 of our business. And for the other 2/3 of the year, we get to hang out with the locals who don't go home in the winter. In the northern reaches of Delaware, a lot of New Jerseyans are retiring to the area where we are, which is interesting because the state is mostly rural and has very low taxes. So there's a reason, and near the beach, low taxes. And Myrtle is changing a little bit too as time goes on, as the snowbirds are starting to retire more permanently to the south, and Myrtle's growing because of that. Both of the regions where we operate are increasing in their population of people who have free time and like to consume adult beverages.
It's a perfect combination for what you do and what we talk about here. And you mentioned, I'm always curious about this because, for me, craft beer wasn't something I just jumped into. Granted, I still have a little bit of time to make sure that is what I want to get into. I've heard it's by the time you're 40, it's beer, bourbon, or smoking meats. I still got time to figure that out, but not much.
or all of those things,
or all of them, which could be what happens.
Or you become a vegetarian.
that won't happen. I can guarantee you that.
I respect that.
Nothing wrong with that, just not for me. But now, how did you get into craft beer? Because like you said, you worked kind of for maybe one of the big boys that we won't name, but what led you down the road of craft beer?
It was a combo. So I was in college at the time also, and a bunch of my friends worked for the somewhat famous local craft brewery, and I showed up and I said, listen, I have some experience, and the brewmaster there said, well, we absolutely need the help. The pay is nearly zero, but we'll feed you lunch and you'll get beer, and there are a lot of interesting and exciting young people working here, and as a young man, I was like, yep, I'm here for that. And there was something about, this is the early 90s, right? Craft beer was a movement. I mean, it still is, but then it was this burgeoning idea. I wasn't a great fit for a large multinational at that time in my life. There are a lot of rules that don't make sense when you're working with union shop folk, and I was way better suited to the creative and exciting environment of a small brewery. I tell people all the time, part of what was interesting about that early days in our industry is that we were in no small way still inventing a lot of what it is that we do now, right? And that's ingredients and equipment. I mean, I remember when we had to drive to Wisconsin to buy malt because nobody was bagging or delivering it. I famously watched somebody pancake a pickup truck at Breeze because they showed up to buy malt, and they're like, well, we don't have a way to sell it to you. And he's like, well, you can just put it in the back of my pickup truck. And they're like, okay, go get underneath the spout there and we'll see how this is going to work. And the truck just went clunk. So that's kind of how I got sucked in. And famously, I sat down at lunch one day with my then boss, and sitting across from me, I had no idea at the time, was Michael Jackson, right? Not the gloved pop star, but the guy from Manchester who talks about beer. And I'm just stoked because we're going to sit and have a beer for lunch. And it wasn't until like 2 hours later when the guy who I still consider to be my mentor in craft beer, named Alan Young, was like, you know who that was, right? And I was like, no. And he handed me all of his books. And I was like, oh, I'm an idiot. But the industry changed so much in the last 30 years. And I think mostly for the good, around the idea that small breweries could independently distribute specifically, and that there were protections in a lot of states from franchise law that give us access to market. Because, since the 70s and 80s, it's been really difficult for small breweries to even open in America. I have sat on the board for the Brewers Association, and So I understand how important the work is that we do in our regulated industry to make sure that these small businesses have access to market, right? So I hope that answers your question about how I landed in the craft beer business. And I've never looked back. I mean, the folks are interesting and exciting and creative and usually a lot of fun. And the group likes to eat and drink, and those are two of my favorite hobbies.
So did you pick all of them except bourbon, or did you pick bourbon too when it was time?
So, moving into Kentucky, I already had an idea about the bourbon business. I grew up in northern Indiana and spent a decent amount of time over the river in Kentucky, right? Just because my family would occasionally vacation in the beautiful southern Indiana and northern Kentucky rolling hills, right? A lot of great state parks down there, and we were a state park kind of family. So, I had experienced bourbon before, and then my sister married a man who ended up in the beer industry too, and he was like, "No, you don't understand bourbon, so we need to sit and drink a lot of it." Yeah. And I was like, I could get on board with this program. And then, while we were relocating, because I've also consulted and moved equipment throughout my career, we were relocating a brewery out of Atlanta, actually to northern Indiana. And we made a point to drive through Kentucky. This must have been 95, 96-ish to stop. And, I mean, your listeners may or may not be as old as my tired behind. But in 1992, we went to Maker's Mark, and it was still kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they didn't really get a lot of visitors. I mean, they were trying, but especially since the Beam Centauri purchase, it's changed a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you go to these distilleries and it's like a winery experience. It's stunning. That they've always been very hospitable, but that Maker's Brewery is like you drive until you're lost, and then you turn left on a goat path, and then there's the distillery, right? And I was pretty much sold after that, and we spent a lot of time traveling for whiskey after that. So to land in Louisville was not entirely an accident, and the distillers are generous to a fault. They tell me it takes a lot of beer to make good whiskey, right? And not just the kind in the process, they got to consume it too. So I'm a fan. We left Kentucky with a trunk load of whiskey, and I'm not unhappy to tell you that it's mostly been depleted, and we're going to have to make a trip back soon.
I love that.
Yeah, wine, spirits, especially whiskey, and beer. I got a soft spot for old man gin. That's a whole nother conversation.
I love that. You mentioned being part of, the Brewers Association, being part of even the Brewers Guild in Kentucky. Why has stuff like that been so important to you to do that and kind of get involved to see this industry be able to grow?
It's a two-parter. First, I think a lot of people don't really understand how heavily regulated the alcohol industry is in the United States, right? It's one of the very few industries that has operation tenets outlined in the Constitution, right? Not just in state laws or federal laws. So because we're such a heavily regulated industry, we have to make sure that we're paying attention to how we're being regulated for lots of reasons, to make sure mostly that our businesses can remain healthy and active, and that customers get the right information about how the alcohol industry should work, right? I mean, I think we all understand that all things in moderation, and that beer especially can be part of a healthy, active lifestyle. And there are a lot of people out there who don't necessarily agree with that or who don't believe in that. So, we need to be advocates for our own work to make sure that people still get to experience the beautiful products that we make. And part of it is it's my turn. We all, I think, owe a debt of service to our forebears who make it possible for us to do what we do, no matter what industry we're in, and especially alcohol. Because in the United States, the laws around alcohol are also a little fraught, right? To this day, there's a decent number of people who think that we oughtn't be able to drink ethanol ever. And obviously, I am opposed to that position. So part of it is that, and of course, when I own my own business, you got to be an advocate. If you're not in there talking about the things that are important for your business, somebody else is going to do the talking for you, right? And there's been a really big shift in our industry in the last couple of decades around distribution, especially, right? I think we've all gotten used to the idea that there's some really interesting stuff around small local producers who are making limited amounts of products, down the street from where we live. And I want to make sure that we still get to do that. And so that consumers don't have a narrow field of choice where they're only able to buy whatever international or national products are brought through the relatively narrow funnel of their local distribution chain. It's not really a widely known, but the middle tier of the alcohol business in the last 20 years is aggressively consolidated to the point where in a lot of markets there's really only one or two major distributors that will move beer around. And distribution is really important to the manufacturing and sale of beer. I don't want to disparage that group, but when you narrow the channel down to very few choices, it means that the middle tier is going to be able to pick winners and losers a whole lot more, whether that's intentional or not. And so I want to make sure that consumers get best access to beer, and to say, hey, the market should choose who wins here, not necessarily a few people in a boardroom at a distribution warehouse. And again, I don't think it's malicious on their part, but you can only work with so many products at a time. And while the industry has exploded, when I started, I think there were 800 breweries in America total, and 98% of the production went through like 6 of them, right? And I think the most recent Brewers Association numbers are somewhere around 9,000 breweries operating in America. That group works really hard just to keep up. And that's awesome, because it means that there's even more varied choices available for consumers. And I think that we got to work really hard to make sure that happens. In addition to that, the Brewers Association has been super influential in collecting technical information and redistributing it to its members, the small breweries of America. And, I consider myself a technical brewer. I want to know what's new and different and exciting in the world of production and food safety and the laws around about what we can put in beer and what we can't put in beer, and hopefully to broaden the horizons of what beer is. I think especially in the last 10 years or so, we've started to see the possible with beer, right? Beer in America for a couple of generations was very narrow. It was yellow 10 Plato lager beer at about 4.5% alcohol, right? And while I'm a huge fan of that style and that idea, I think that we're starting to develop a broader beer culture in America, and the trade association has a lot to do with that. I mean, they also support homebrewing, which I think is vital and important to what we do, because it helps people understand how beer gets made. And, you appreciate baking more if you bake a little bit, right?
This is true.
When you see a baker do something beautiful and you've made your own bread, which I have done disastrously, as did everyone during the pandemic, right? You're like, wow, that's pretty darn impressive. So I continue to serve the trade association. I have for years. I'm now back working with the state of Delaware Brewers Guild a little bit. We're working on franchise reform and self-distribution laws in Delaware. I have been active in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Kentucky in the past. We gotta speak up so that people understand what our challenges are, and to help keep the industry healthy so that consumers can make the choices about what they want to drink.
It's so true. And I think people, as they learn more about how the alcohol industry works, they are a little amazed at the challenges that folks face. And, as you've moved across, you've been able to visit some different places, whether that's the Great Lakes, New Jersey, obviously the Bluegrass State and beyond. How has that impacted your brewing? Because I feel like styles differ each place, what people kind of like. There are some that are always going to be key, but I feel like there are different styles in different places.
Yeah, I mean, the world has been flattened a bit by the internet, right? So, I am old enough to remember a time when you had to call somebody to get the answer to a question, or you had to drive to the library and look at a book, God forbid. But yeah, terroir in the wine industry, we talk about terroir, right? Which is the flavor of a place. And I think that that's real in beer too, right? So part of this is about just local communities of brewers. I mean, especially in the craft brewing industry, brewers that are located near each other tend to play off each other, right? We share ideas about ingredients. This is one of the coolest things about the craft brewing industry, right? Like, there's not this cutthroat, I need every drop at your expense idea. It's more like, hey, we're going to go there together, right? And that community is one of the reasons I've stayed so long in this industry. So it's been awesome for me to get to experience that community in, half a dozen different places. There's always some commonality, especially because, the internet has flattened the world. So when somebody like Treehouse starts making hazy New England IPAs, which, by the way, started in Philadelphia, I get a kick out of that. People are like, that's New England. I'm like, well, who did it first? We can fight about that. I mean, arguably Greg Noonan did it 35 years ago at Vermont Pub. There's the whole Cascadian dark or black IPA argument, which I think is mostly dumb because it's all the same.
Exactly.
But there are a lot of people who want to crucify me for that. So I think it's been awesome both to make friends in the industry in different places, and to work a little bit, not a lot, with local ingredients. For good or for ill, the base ingredients in most beers are commodity products, and they get made in a few places in the world kind of narrowly and redistributed. But how they get used locally has changed over time, right? So it was interesting to come specifically to Kentucky and to talk about Kentucky Common as a style. And a lot of people don't know this about the Lexington and Louisville areas, but in 1938 to 48, there was this huge influx of Austrian, Swiss, and German immigrants to the areas, and they brought with them a lot of culture. And one of the cultures they brought was lager beer brewing specifically. And while Kentucky Common is interesting to me for all the reasons, I think I have more fun with the larger conversation of all of the German breweries that exist in those two major metropolitan areas. And I'll loop Cincinnati in there too, right? I mean, you and your listeners, I'm sure, understand the geography that created specifically Louisville as a city. It was one of the largest cities in the United States because we didn't have highways, right? So people have to get in and out of the Midwest. How? It was faster to come out of Philadelphia, sail around Florida into the Gulf, come up the Mississippi and the Ohio, all the way to Pittsburgh even. But there's a physical impediment at Louisville, which is the Falls of the Ohio. So it was a portage spot. You couldn't run the steamboats up and down the river there. And so a lot of these immigrants who were coming from Western Europe, especially educated people who had to very quickly leave when the Kaiser wanted to off them, right? Because the coup was attempted and it failed. They end up coming to the Midwest, and specifically to Louisville, Lexington, Cincinnati. And so to see that lager tradition get continued by brewers like 1020 and by Country Boy and by Mad Tree and the folks in Cincinnati and Rheingeist, that whole corridor along the Ohio River has been really awesome. The original question was us talking about how my travels have influenced how I view beer. That's just one slice of it. I won't go too deep into it, but when I moved to the Philadelphia metro area, I was introduced. Already had an understanding about Belgian beer. I think anybody who's into craft beer has been down that road. But all of a sudden, I'm in a community where, there were people like Tom Peters, famously of Monk's Cafe in Philadelphia, who in the 80s and 90s was buying plane tickets for kegs of beer out of Belgium, right? And so there's an entire community that developed in that area around traditional Belgian styles. And of course, as Americans, we interpret everything, right? So we pick up an idea, slice it, dice it, repack it, brand it as traditional or not, and then sell it in a very uniquely American way, right? I love, I'm friends with the folks at Sierra Nevada, and every once in a while I giggle about Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, right? Which of course is attempting to emulate the great pale ales of London and Great Britain, but looks absolutely nothing like it, right? And so that's been a fun experience too, right? There are a lot, especially in Western Europe, where most of beer culture in the world comes from today. There are a lot of rules around what you can and can't do, and in America, thankfully, while there are a lot of regulations about ethanol specifically, there's not too much around style or authentic style. So we get to interpret what's been done in the beer world a lot. And that gives me creativity, and it's fun to engage with the brewers around to see, hey, who's doing what? There's this whole idea about fruited sour beer that just came out of left field a few years back and is on fire. And I'm here for that. And I've been absolutely here for the New England IPA run because I'm a hop guy. I love the way hops taste. But also, 10 years before that, when the dry, super bitter West Coast IPA hit the market and it was a thing, I still have a soft spot in my heart for that. I've done a lot of collaborations and spent a lot of time with brewers in Southern California back when there weren't so many of us. We famously did East Coast, West Coast fights between brewers where we would, we'd make a East Coast lager and this is all an excuse to have a happy hour event, right? Where we drink. So we're going to meet in Chicago and we're going to serve our beer against each other and see who wins. And well, everybody wins because you get to drink a bunch of beer, and that's not finished for me. Now somehow I got old. I suppose if you stick around long enough, that happens, right? I'm not ancient. I'm solidly middle-aged, but I interview people now to fill roles in brew pubs, and they're like, oh yeah, I've got a ton of experience. I've been in this industry like 5 years, and I'm like, 5 whole years. I mean, don't get me wrong, 5 years these days can be, you can become an expert in 5 years, that's for sure. But my arc of what could be has shifted a little bit, and specifically in the last decade. And I am super stoked to be a part of a community where we can swap ideas. I mean, what other industry can I call up a competitor and say, hey, you're doing this thing, you want to tell me about it? And they'll be like, yeah, man, come over, I'll show you the recipe.
Or they'll give you ingredients because you're short.
That happens a lot, and I'm thankful about that, right? I mean, FedEx is expensive, so I'm like, hey, can we borrow a box of hops? Absolutely. And by the way, when you're coming over to bring that box of hops, can we borrow some yeast? So it's pretty great. There are very few jerks in our industry. There are a couple of famous ones, but we won't talk about those. Even the famous ones are actually pretty nice. They just like their press, right? So I really enjoy the community around craft beer, and now it's even gone the other direction where the larger brewers are getting re-engaged, especially the people who work for them, in the professional associations, right? There's a few of them. I mean, we've already talked about the BA. The Brewers Association is really a trade association for brewery owners that does a lot to help people who are in the industry learn about what we do. But there's Master Brewers Association of the Americas, which I used to call Old Man Drinking Club. I went to my first MBAA meeting in Cincinnati in maybe 92, and I think I was the youngest person in the room by 50 years, right? It's a bunch of 80-year-old German guys sitting around the Hudepol Schandling tap room talking about the good old days in the 1950s. And that's completely changed. That organization is now split about 50-50, big brewers and small brewers. And even that community has gotten pretty awesome, where we can talk to brewers from the largest breweries, and they're like, yeah, we know how to solve that problem and we'll help you. I think even the big brewing industry is pretty famous for that. I went to school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, taking a brewery science and engineering course, and one of our instructors was this guy named Dirk Bandiak, and Dirk at that time was the microbiologist for what is now Molson Miller course. And he's like, look, everybody kind of knows that group famously invented the whirlpool, at least everybody in our industry. And this is kind of a technical brewing thing, but I'm talking about it anyway. And it was super important to the quality of beer, specifically its ability to be bright and be stored a long period of time. And they had an internal company meeting that I only know about anecdotally, but this is kind of industry famous, where they were like, this is so important, we feel like we have to tell everybody else about it. And I mean, that's nuts, right? There's this novel. Can you imagine? I'm going to pick on the DuPont Corporation because I'm in Delaware. Can you imagine DuPont saying, hey, we just invented this proprietary process, and now we're going to tell all of our competitors about it, right? And I was like, wow, that's a great story, because we kind of think that craft brewers are like that, but we don't think about big brewers being that way. And in my experience, the entire industry is that way. And it's the reason that I will probably continue to brew beer until I can't walk anymore. And then I'll get somebody to wheel me over to the brew house.
Well, and like you said, the industry is amazing. And now, like we mentioned at the top here with Crooked Hammock, you've got some fun releases coming up. You just released the Hammock Light Lager. July 1st is the Wide-Eyed Wit. What's it been like to go there and bring some of your styles that you enjoy there and kind of put your spin on things?
Hammock has been a blast. First of all, I mean, beer at the beach is a great idea in general, right? I'm here for that. I'm 100% here for that.
I mean, you can drink anytime, right?
Yeah. Yes. It's the how tall are you conversation, right? My brother-in-law is 6'7", and every time somebody asks how tall he is and they give a number, he just says yes, right? Are you 7 feet tall? Yes. Are you 9 feet tall? Yes. So for me, do you drink beer all day? Sure.
Time stands stills when you're on vacation at the beach.
It's a little true, not a lot true, right? We taste beer all day long, so coming on with these guys has been really interesting. The founder, Rich Gerhan, will tell you that, Crooked Hammock was opened with one ton abandon. He worked in the banking industry and just decided he needed a little shakabuku, right? A little life change that took him to a place that was a little more laid back so he could spend time with his family and, enjoy the world we live in. So that ethic to me is appealing. I have not so famously vacationed in this area for years. And my partner is an awesome woman. And she was like, I could see us retiring to this area for a lot of reasons. And I'm showing my age by even having that conversation. By the way, I'm nowhere near retirement, but I'm nearer than I used to be. And when the opportunity came up to work with this group, I was pretty engaged. I like their story. There's a lot of really great professionals on the team, from culinary to service to the team that works with me in brewing. And they were doing some interesting and creative stuff, but we're trying to grow, and they needed a little help to maybe focus that effort. And I'm happy to say that, I think we're really on a path there. One of them is lager beer specifically, right? Obviously, I'm passionate about all of the lager styles. We all kind of understand that our industry has walked gingerly around them for years because they tend to be very technically difficult to make in general. They require equipment that is a little more expensive and a little more space and time consuming. And I think that the industry has finally gotten mature enough that people know how to do this well, and I put myself in that bucket too. And the ingredients have come around. We have access to the yeast and to the good quality malts that we need to make lager beer. And one of the things that we've been able to do with this company is to say, hey, for a lot of years, not just us, the industry was like, well, this yellow ale that we make is designed to emulate a beautiful continental German lager beer, but it isn't really one. And now, instead of saying, hey, it's like that, we can just say, yeah, we made that. In the fall, we released a beer called Oktoberfest. That's a Märzen lager. And, I know it's gonna blow up because there's been a little bit, I'll call it, backlash is a harsh word, but there's been a little bit of pivot in the industry. I think that we all know, at least those of us who make beer and talk about beer, know that IPA is the king of the seasonal world, right? What's hot and new is the same thing that's been hot and new for years, which is hoppy beer, whether it's hazy or bright or what. But there's been this little segment of the consuming population, and I put most brewers into this bucket, who are like, that's been very fun and very interesting, but you know what I need is a crushable pint of 10-degree Czech lager, right? Something that I can be refreshed by, and that I can appreciate the subtleties of the hops and the malt that went into it. I used to joke that in the craft brewing industry, we just shove flavor into beer until it breaks, which is cool, but it also is a tool to hide a lot of sins. And lager beers don't hide those sins. So being able to make those at Crooked Hammock has been great. My team has been fired up about it, and they really risen to the occasion. So when we made and launched the Crooked Hammock Light, which is basically template of Czech lager or American premium, depending on how you slice it. It's light because the rest of our portfolio is much heavier. It's been received with very, very, very large cheers and smiles, right? People are like, oh, thank God. Right? And we still make hazy beers, we still make hoppy beers, we still make sour beers, a lot of sour beer, fruited sour and Belgian beers. But sneakily, this clean yellow lager beer is climbing up the volume ladder inside of our portfolio. And Wide-Eyed Wit, which we're going to release here around the 4th of July, is in that direction with a subtle shift, right? I mean, we can't overlook the relevance of hazy wheat beers, especially phenolic ones in the summertime. In my world, we might have thought about Hefeweizen in that bucket, but this market really loves, and I personally really love wheat beer, especially if the spices are fresh, right? A lot of people don't know this, but one of the largest spice companies in the world is McCormick. It's located in Baltimore, Maryland, their headquarters. And I've done some work with them in the past, especially around coriander, which I think is a pretty amazing spice. And so, the idea that a spiced Belgian style beer is important to specifically this market is a big deal. So it's being well received so far. And I'm looking forward to the launch of another, kind of our shtick is backyard cookout. And along with that goes approachable beer, although well-made and flavorful, that you want to sit and drink 3 or 4 pints of throughout a relaxing afternoon session of grilling and or smoking meats and playing bago, cornhole, call it what you will. And that's our vibe. So it's fitting really well with what we're doing. And, my team has really been able to lean into carefully and thoughtfully making these beers at a high level of quality too. So we're stoked about that. And I can't wait for that to drop. Now I'll leap ahead one whole month. We've got one more new product dropping this year, which is going to be called Sway New England IPA. We make lots of different New England IPAs all the time, but my hospitality team was like, hey, we'd love to have a beer that people can count on, right? Like, new and different is awesome, and we're going to always make new and different products, but can you give us something that especially people who come to us seasonally or weekends during the summer can look forward to? So, in addition to the Wide-Eyed Wit, which is going to come out here in just a few weeks, right behind that will be that beer. And I can't wait to see the changeover of our portfolio. I don't think this is what we're going to make forever, but these products will definitely be around for the next couple of years.
Well, like you said, you never know where the winds of the industry might take you, because they always seem to come back to certain styles and some new ones pop up. And when folks get to visit the brewery down there in Myrtle, or maybe they're up in the two in Delaware, what can they expect? Because like you said, it's kind of a brew pub vibe, backyard vibe, and it sounds like it's a fun place to be.
I think you're right about that. And obviously I work for the company, so I'm legally obligated to talk about it in this way, but I will tell you about 2/3 of our spaces are outside, right? So we have this huge backyard that's specifically designed for your kids to run around and scream and yell while you have a pint. And I don't want to say we encourage that behavior, but we totally encourage that behavior. Our locations tend to be in areas that are very busy and very popular. And, Myrtle, sometimes when the beach empties, suddenly all the restaurants in town can be on a 2-hour wait, right? And so what do you do about that? And nobody wants to sit in the lobby of your local national chain fast casual restaurant and feed quarters to your kid to play the claw machine while he or she spins in circles waiting to be fed. Our whole deal is, you're on vacation usually, or you're here to relax and unwind. So we want to provide you with the space to do that. So while you might wait 2 hours for a table at one of our locations, nobody seems to be fussing about it. Well, number one, because they got a pint in their hand. And number two, because they're outside in nature. We've got fire pits and backyard games, jungle gyms for the kids, swings, lots of interesting and creative works of art. In Myrtle, we've got a Volkswagen from the 60s. It's been chopped in half and turned into a booth. And the first time I saw it, I was like, I don't understand that. And then 5 minutes later, I watched a group of young girls sit down in it and start giggling. And I was like, now I understand. Right. It's not a junk on the walls kind of place. It's more of a junk everywhere kind of place, in a good way. If you use the restrooms in our place, I'm of a certain age, but almost all of the stuff that's on the walls in the men's room of all of our locations just reminds me of my grandfather from the 1970s and 80s. Old somebody famously found a yard dart set. You may remember.
I've heard stories. I wasn't allowed to play with them. I was too accident prone.
Nobody was allowed to play with them after like 1978, right? I mean, here's a great idea. Why don't we give a bunch of adolescent kids spears to throw at each other? And we've got a set of them bolted to the wall so that nobody can throw them at each other. But I see that, and the nostalgia is just a lot. So that's kind of what our vibe is like. The menu is focused on cookout food, so it's approachable American cuisine that you might expect to see if you visited somebody's house and they were grilling in the backyard. We do push the limits of the backyard a little bit, both in the beer world and in the culinary world. We've got some very talented culinary staff who are working at saying, hey, burgers, wings, and nachos are great, and I think ours are awesome, but what other interesting seasonal culinary things can we do? We do a decent amount of barbecue, although we're not exclusively a barbecue place. And our culinary director Ted DePillo and I really enjoy talking flavor with each other, right? And we inspire each other. So it's the time of year when we start talking about Oktoberfest, right? And he's like, what do you think about sausage? And I'm like, you mean meat in a tube-shaped form?
Absolutely.
I am here for that, right? So, and he'll be like, well, tell me about beer. And I'm like, can we do Schweinhaxen and half chickens like they do at Oktoberfest? And he was like, I love the idea. No.
It was worth a shot.
A man's got to ask, right? I got to get him to make me some braised pork knuckle and some roast chickens when the time comes around. He's like, if you wear your lederhosen, I'll roast you a chicken. And I'm like, well, that's not a burden. I mean, come on, don't throw me in that briar patch.
You're gonna be. I was just gonna do that anyway. And as we wrap up here, obviously this is called the Road Trip Series 2023. So if someone's coming to visit, we'll say specifically the Myrtle Beach location, what are maybe some fun things to check out while they're nearby that aren't the touristy things that people might think of in Myrtle? Some good fun places to check out near y'all or that you enjoy down there. Putting you on the spot.
I mean, Myrtle's really focused on three major areas, right? Obviously, there's the beach, and Myrtle and North Myrtle Beach both have some of the most stunning beaches along the Atlantic coast. So I always advise people, if you're coming to where we are, make sure you physically get to the beach. We are located in a development called Barefoot Landing, which obviously is focused a lot, as you might not be shocked to learn, around golf. So, if you're coming to Myrtle, you got to golf. If you don't golf, you're still going to have a good time. But at last I counted, I think there were 38 PGA designed golf courses within an hour of us. And I always tell people, get south or inland a little bit to see the low country, right? I mean, there's just some stunning scenery around us in the form of tidal marshes and spots along the water that aren't necessarily boardwalky, right? And that's my recommendation. But I have learned this in my travels in the last 6 or 7 years, which is sometimes it's okay to be a tourist and do the touristy things. I lived in Philadelphia for a long time, and I once famously, or not so famously, took my family to see the Liberty Bell, and all of my friends were like, "Why'd you do that? That's a tourist trap." And I'm like, that's where our country got founded, right? Right there at Independence
It's
Hall.
kind of an important thing to see if you can.
A little bit. I mean, I'm a history guy, right? And they're like, "Yeah, I'm not going to that tourist trap." And we had a blast. And so I tell people, maybe we're not going to the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum, because I don't really count that. But seeing Murrells Inlet and the areas where freight came in and out of the southeast coastline is interesting. Getting to see alligators and the wildlife in the backcountry down there is just stunning. There's a little lagoon right at Barefoot Landing in front of our place, and there is apparently there's a gator that lives in there, and he's a little fat. I'm afraid that our customers and the customers in the area may have overfed him a little bit.
It happens to all of us. It happens
right?
to all.
I know, it's a problem with having food be one of my favorite pastimes, right?
We're all there. It happens to the best of us. And Larry, thank you for sharing your story in beer, Crooked Hammock. And I must say, I got to try the Crooked Hammock Light and the Light Lager, and that was a delicious beer that I think is perfect around a fire or anytime you're just hanging out with some friends. And like I said, thanks for sharing all that with me.
My pleasure entirely, Jonathan. It was great to meet you.
Find more from Hops and Spirits at hopspirits.com.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.